Delighted on this episode to be talking with author, creator, podcaster David Agranoff. David, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely a pleasure. I will mention a couple of your works here, most recently Great America in Dead World, and this great title, The Vegan Revolution with Zombies. I feel like the with zombies sends it home.
That was my first book, but and a bit of a satire of there was a craze at the time of with zombie books, and
Uh-huh.
so part of the joke of that book was that the main character, she was an editor at a with zombie publishing series, and but yeah, so
Yeah, I
that
remember that.
was
I remember that craze.
yeah. I mean, that was 2011 that came out. So that was my first published novel, even though it was not the first one I wrote, but it was the first one to come out. But yeah.
Nice, nice. Uh, I get the sense that very often when people look back at like their early work, there's like oh, I've grown since then. So I'm sure your process has changed, and sure that you're asking different questions now than you were then.
Well, sure, but there's plenty that I feel proud of with Vegan Revolution with Zombies. I mean, it's the only like book length comedy that I've written, or like full on satire. I've written a lot of short stories that are satire,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and so that book was entirely meant to be funny, which is very outside of the box for me for most of my work. Um, but no, I mean, I'm proud of that one. I certainly have grown as an author since then, but there's I mean, that book is kind of like Portlandia with zombies. So,
Hmm.
and I was living in Portland when I wrote it, and it's very much a send up of Portland. So there's a degree that book you can get into it more if you have this Venn diagram of knowing about the vegan community, knowing about Portland, and knowing about zombie movies. And there's a very small Venn diagram of everybody who gets all of it. But also, the book was actually like there was a paper about the vegan revolution with zombies published in the Journal of Animal Studies. So,
No, it's
specifically because there's a lot of things about, even though it's meant to be funny, there's a lot of real deep, serious investigation of um, ethics towards animals and different levels of to which it's taken. So, and I've personally been vegan since Bill Clinton was in office for 2 weeks. So, I've got 30 years of veganism in there. So, there's a lot of things in there that I'm actually quite proud of. But yeah, I
cool.
mean, it was a long time ago. So,
Yeah.
um, but the first of 5 books that I published with Eraserhead, Deadite, and that one was basically, um, hey, David, vegan books sell, zombie books sell, and if you write a vegan themed zombie novel for us, we'll let you do the next couple books, whatever you want to do. And
Nice.
so that's kind of how that happened. And then, but Deadeye really wanted me to um, explore the idea of being kind of like the punk rock horror guy because there wasn't anybody like doing that. So a lot of the first couple books were punk rock themed horror, and Vegan Rev kind of fits into that a little bit too because there's a lot of punk rock humor in there. And then that turned into like a punk rock ghost story, and I did a collection called Amazing Punk Stories. It's all different pulp fiction styles with punk rock characters and settings, and I'm pretty proud of that collection, and that I mean that plays with those themes too, but yeah, certainly quite different from a lot of the stuff that I'm doing these days. But
Yeah. Yeah. A good part of the journey, it sounds like.
yeah, well, and I like that stuff. I'm proud of it. I'm happy with it. And sometimes there a lot of times there's deeper themes to those books than A lot of times people realize because if I have Punk Rock Ghost Story, which we did like a kind of Blair Witch style um, campaign for that book where I spent 7 years in the lead up to the book coming out, um, trying to convince people that the band in the book was real, including like recording and pressing a record by the fake band in the book. And but that seems like that's just kind of like fun punk rock stuff, but the themes of that book were very much about how there was the punk rock world before Nirvana and there was the punk rock world after Nirvana, and it changed a lot because before Nirvana, it was definitely not cool to be a punk rocker in a Midwestern high school like I grew up in, and we were running for our lives. We were constantly fighting. We were getting beat up and by jocks and rednecks, and everything kind of changed with Nirvana because suddenly it became cool to be different and alternative, or at least more understood. So like we and so the ghost story and punk rock ghost story was kind of a method to talk about like punk rock pre Nirvana and post Nirvana, and it's kind of like uh, The Shining in a punk rock tour van, but that the concept was meant to kind of show how punk rock had changed pre and post like this kind of monumental thing. So that's what the idea for writing it was.
Yeah. Uh, Sounds like you bring in a lot of kind of pop culture commentary, but then you have horror and science fiction, which kind of allow you to look at that in a slightly different way at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, I mean, I definitely reference those stuff, but then, like Great America is a very
Hmm.
philosophical science fiction novel, and um, it's really a huge reference to one pop culture icon, and that's Philip K. Dick. But at the
Hmm.
same time,
Hmm.
like, um, you know, well, I kind of, yesterday what as we're recording this, yesterday was the big No Kings rally, and I've been
Hmm.
kind of saying that um Great American Dead World is my No Kings protest, and for many reasons I had hoped that that novel would be an experiment in kind of seeing what the mega nightmare could be, you know as an experiment, and hopefully we would
Hmm.
never have found out. But unfortunately, in that sense. But I mean, it's there's a little bit more to the novel than just that. I mean, it was that there was a specific experiment going on in the new novel, which was and it's kind of hard to talk about it without going super deep, but um, as a I've spent 6 years doing a podcast about Philip K. Dick,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
who's obviously one of my favorite writers of all time. And um, in studying Philip K. Dick's, I'm working on a nonfiction book about his unfinished treatments that he left behind and never finished. And in the process of that, a collector discovered a letter that he had written to a fellow science fiction writer named Ron Goulart in the 60s that outlined his like formula for writing a novel. And I spent a weekend murder boarding 30 of the novels based on like the five core elements of this Philip K. Dick formula. And not every novel followed the formula, and it was mostly intuitive. He only wrote it out one time in 1964 or 5, and never thought about it again. Sent it off in a letter, never thought about it again. So I've definitely thought more about the Philip K. Dick formula than he did. But So what the experiment of Great America and Dead World was is what good is teaching the formula if you don't use it? And so, I'd started teaching a class about the Philip K. Dick formula, and I had written a chapter of unfinished PKD about the Philip K. Dick formula. And then I thought, and it was my editor, D. Harlan Wilson, or my co-host, D. Harlan Wilson, on the podcast, kind of joked with me about what good is teaching if you don't use it. And then I took it a step further and kind of method acted as Phil. And the idea was the experiment was, could I write a novel with the Philip K. Dick formula that commented on all the same themes and ideas, and just basically method act as Phil and write a novel about, and I wrote it in 2023 about like MAGA and climate change and the and AI as we know it, and all these things and social media and all that. And so I was trying to kind of channel Phil in doing that. I mean, it is very much still my novel, but there's a weird kind of authorship to this one where it's not quite me, but it's not quite anybody else. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
this weird influence, because there are definitely parts of it that I that are things that I would never normally write in a novel, right? And my novels are mostly a little bit more action oriented, and this is definitely a philosophical science fiction novel. So, and it plays and it explores those themes and those ideas of the the of what is human, what is real, you know, and you know, part of this idea is kind of exploring, kind of like the nightmare we're all living to its to its full extent, just to kind of see what it, you know, how it would play out. And I had a lot of fun writing it. It's a weird book, but I'm I'm pretty proud of it. I mean, obviously, it's the most recent one, so you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I have written one since then, but it's the most recent out in the world. And Keith, my editor at Choir, is a great partner, and we did a novel before that together called People's Park, which is also PKD influenced, but People's Park is less. It's not written using the formula. It's just kind of plays with some ideas that are very Phil like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that one's like kind of a coming of age, bizarro horror piece that is about my hometown, Bloomington, Indiana, and it was inspired by, there was a guy who kind of walked around the streets of my hometown, called Electric Fred, and I had always wanted to write a novel about Bloomington where Electric Fred was kind of the hero of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the weird things that happened was when my wife used to work at a coffee shop in Bloomington, and Fred was a regular there. And he was constantly writing these exegeses about all the different things he believed of the universe. And he gave two of those notebooks to my wife at
Oh,
some
wow.
point. So I have two of Electric Fred's notebooks. So some of the fictional Electric Fred in People's Park, some of his writings are directly inspired by the actual Electric Fred notebooks, which was pretty cool. So
Very
um,
cool.
yeah, but that's also that novel is very much kind of inspired by also by punk rock and growing up and coming of age in the late 80s as a punk rocker in a small town. So probably the last of the super punk rock novels I might write, but you never know. So
There,
um,
there could be a resurgence. You never know.
yeah, it could be. People might, they're finding them. Paperback Warrior just did a review of Punk Rock Ghost Story, and it was pretty exciting to see somebody like kind of getting it, like 10 years, 9 years later, right? So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so it was a neat thing.
It sounds like you have a really creative process of getting inspiration, kind of putting work together as you're moving from project to project. What is the reset like? I mean, I imagine writing with the Philip K. Dick method and formula, there were probably some parts where you had to kind of clear the mechanism a little bit.
Well, certainly, the most recent book that I wrote is a sequel to my novel, "The Last Night to Kill Nazis." So, and "The Last Night to Kill Nazis" is very different because it's a action adventure novel set. So, "The Last Night to Kill Nazis" is my probably my top selling book, and it's the only one that's been nationally released. So you can get it at any Barnes and Nobles in the country, and believe me, people, if it helps if you buy it at Barnes and Nobles. I really, uh, especially gearing up for the sequel. But and the concept with "The Last Night to Kill Nazis" was that I've always wanted to write a World War II mission novel. Like I love Alistair MacLean novels, like Guns of Navarone, Force 10 from Navarone, and of course the movie Where Eagles Dare. And I just and these are it's funny because everyone always compares Last Night to Inglorious Bastards, but I'm always like, hey, it was more inspired by the same movies that inspired Inglorious Bastards than it was Inglorious
Hmm.
Bastards. But that's okay. I mean, I like Inglorious Bastards; it's good. But Last Night was more inspired by like the Navarone films from the '60s and '70s, and Where Eagles Dare and stuff like that. And I always wanted to write one of those. In fact, I wrote a science fiction novel before that that's from Clash Books called Goddamn Killing Machines. And Killing Machines is basically a 24th century version of those World War II mission novels. Um, I've described that one as like the Dirty Dozen if Philip K. Dick wrote it, kind of thing. Um, Although I wrote that before I was as deep into the Philip K. Dick studies, so it's more inspired by Philip K. Dick movies than it was actual Philip K. Dick novels in a weird way. But anyways, like I had written that, and that was like a tribute to those, but it wasn't. I wanted to write an actual World War II novel, and then I kind of knew that like with my publishing connections and stuff that it would be easier if I wrote a genre one, something that was genre. And plus I love horror and I love sci-fi, so why not come up with an idea. And my buddy even Zorik and I were chatting late at night after like a Trailblazer game because we're both Portland Trailblazer fans, and he mentioned some movie he was watching. I think it was Under a Blood Red Sky, and he said it's like Air Force One with a vampire. And I and then he said any movie could be improved by adding a vampire, right? Or kind of joking with me. And then since I had been searching for this World War II idea, it wasn't just the idea of like doing a World War II mission novel with a vampire, although that was fun. But when the title came to me, "The Last Night to Kill Nazis," and I kind of envisioned this whole thing of taking place on the last night of the war. Like if this Jewish commando and this vampire had one night at the end of the war to kill as many Nazis as possible before Goebbels signed the surrender, was the original concept, the
Hmm.
high concept for it. And so I started exploring that idea, and really I didn't have the novel until there's a character in it named Alice who is the she's like one of Hitler's secretaries, and because I needed a POV on the Nazi side, and who was kind of a gray character. And once I had her, the novel kind of all came to my head. And from idea to finished manuscript was like the fastest I've ever gone. I had it done in like 2 months. And I pitched it to Christoph at Clash. And it was funny because, the conversation started with, we really don't have time in our publishing schedule right now for anything, David. And then I said, let me just tell you the title. And Christoph will tell you it's the only book he's ever bought entirely on a pitch. Um, and he
Nice.
had to read it to know that before I got a contract. And we're both very excited. So I've just recently finished the sequel, and we're very excited that it takes it to another level. And this one takes place about 2 weeks after the events of the first novel, and let's just say it has U-boats and mummies and
Nice.
escaped Nazis. And um, I think tentatively we're calling it the next night to kill Nazis, the armies of Anubis. And uh, yeah, and to get back, that's a long way to get to your question. Do I have a cleansing process between? Certainly. It's a different world writing, especially writing about World War II. So, heading into it, I do a lot of research about the era, read a lot of books about the history of the era. This one, I had to read a lot about 1940s Cairo, and I had to do a lot of research about Egypt and Cairo during and around the time of the war, for obvious reasons. And I had to study the mechanics of submarines and submarine warfare for the time. So I had to do a lot of that, and that kind of got me into it. But then I just started watching a lot of World War II movies. And if anybody follows me online during that era, or when I was writing that book, it was like the amount of movies I watched on Pluto and Tubi of World War II movies was off the rails. I watched a lot, and I saw a lot of like real deep cut World War II movies that uh, I mean, there were some that were incredible, like the Burt Lancaster movie, The Train, that I had never seen before. That I was like, how have I never seen this before? Because my dad and I watched a lot of these movies. So some of them I knew, like Run Silent, Run Deep, like the U-boat movie, for example, like things like that. But I'd seen with my dad. But there were some real deep cuts that I was not prepared for. And so that was kind of fun. And that was a part of the cleansing process. And again, I've been doing so much nonfiction writing. We're working on an encyclopedia for a Philip K. Dick encyclopedia. And I'm one of the editors of the project. We have over 20 researchers volunteering to do
Nice.
this, but I wrote
Nice.
all the Wikipedia entries for the short stories, which is 5 volumes, 123 short stories, and so that has been taking up a lot of my time. And so next night I wrote between writing the first 3 volumes of Wikipedia, and then I just finished the last. Well, I'm finishing volume 5. Like that's what I was working on before we hopped on here. Was I was working? I've got 6 stories left of the
Wow.
123,
Very
and
close.
yeah, I'm very close. But and then I'm hoping to write a novella after this. But um, but yeah, and then I'm one of the organizers of next year's Philip K. Dick Festival here in California, and and we're a week before the World Science Fiction Convention. So but we've got a lot of real fun things planned for the whole weekend. It's going to be really cool. But I should say also that we do a live podcast every Tuesday night. Gaming fans. Um, and anybody can come and join. Like for example, this week we have Ken Liu, who's most famous for translating the Three Body Problem, but he's a really great author himself, and he just finished this, or he just released this sci-fi thriller called All That We See or Seem. And For example, he'll be the guest this week, and the next week, well, I'll have Vincent V. Cava on to talk about. And like sometimes we pick like a short story and we all read it and talk about it. But this happens every Tuesday, and anybody can come and join us and hang out with us if you're a giant sci-fi and Philip K. Dick nerd. It happens every Tuesday. So
Cool.
6 o'clock Pacific time. But if you follow me online, I post usually the links on Sunday morning so people have time to think about it and plan. So, and that's fun.
Nice.
That, we do that all the time.
You are a busy person, lots of projects, and it sounds like the projects kind of very often lead to other projects as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes I take on too much, but as dickheads, unfortunately, we've slowed down a lot, which I'm sure the people that listen to our podcast have noticed. We're very close to finishing all the novels, and then we slowed to an absolute crawl, partially because um, we've got so many other things we're doing, but also health problems from one of my co-hosts, and some various things. But also, like, if we've kept our normal pace, we would have been done 2 years ago. And But we've only got like 4 or 5 of the. Well, we have less. We have, I don't know exactly how many novels we have left. Maybe 6, but we've done all the science fiction novels, and we're into the novels that were published after his death, which are mostly the mainstream novels. And
Mhm.
you know those are a little less reinforcing to get to, although they're still very interesting to talk about and read. And I mean, I'm not in a rush to have no more Philip K. Dick to read. And
Yeah,
I'm very close to that. Now that I've read every short story, um, and I've read all but 6 of the mainstream novels. That's kind of frightening me internally that I will have no more Philip K. Dick to read very soon. Um, it took a while because I had 44 novels, so you know,
oh,
but it is, hey, it's part of the thing. So, you know, but I mean, we've got we also do episodes on other authors and tangential authors, like people he was friends with, people he was influenced by, and things like that. And if we finish the novels and we still feel like going, we might kind of dive into do like episodes on the short stories and kind of dive in. But
nice.
I mean, and it's I could use more time to actually write myself. So I got to finish once we finish Wikipedia, and I mean, I'll probably have to do another pass on unfinished. I'm not as polished of a nonfiction writer as I am. I think I'm a better novelist. It's like when you don't get to make shit up, it's a little bit harder, you know.
Even if it's based on the historical research.
Yeah, and I'm a researcher by heart. My father was a professor, and I love digging into things, and so I like, especially, I'm more interested. And some people are interested in Philip K. Dick as a mystic, or Philip K. Dick as a this or that. I'm interested in Philip K. Dick as the writer. So like, I can get into the granular stuff of like, you know, uh, like it was really fascinating to me in 1953. He wrote 34 short stories that year. That was his most prolific year as a short story writer. And his aunt died in October of that year. He was very close to his aunt. And it's interesting to me, like looking at the timeline and seeing like, oh, he still submitted 5 short stories that month uh,
Mhm.
to his agent the month that his Aunt Marion died. And so like we're constantly looking at the timeline and the things like that. And as the uber nerds for this, like, we recently did a pilgrimage to all like the sites in the Bay Area where he lived. And I actually talked myself into his high school bedroom because the guy who lives there now was like out front eating an apple. And it's a long story, but I got in the house. And you know we're such uber nerds that when we went to Colorado to do the PKD Fest a couple of years ago, we actually went to the houses where his Mima and his mother lived in the 19 teens, like long before he was even born. And, we went to those houses. And I don't know what we really got out. I mean, I know some things we got out of it. I mean, it's really interesting to see the family history and to see where he came from and all those things. So, but we
Hmm.
also went to spots he fictionalized, like one of the most famous scenes. I don't know if you watched Man the High Castle, the miniseries,
Hmm.
but so if you recall the scene where the Mr. Tagomi is sitting on the bench and he goes between universes. In the novel, it actually takes place in a park in Chinatown in San Francisco, an actual park. And we went to that park and we sat in the benches that, if you triangulate where he's writing about, you can figure out, but essentially there's like a row of benches there that one of those benches would have been the one that Tagomi sat on. And so we went there, and he wrote a novel called Dr. Blood Money. We went to like a place where a good part of the action in Dr. Blood Money took place. And it was interesting to see these places in the real world, and it really connects you to an author and to all those things. And I don't know.
It all
I don't know
comes
if
from
anyone's,
somewhere.
well, yeah. Well, and if somebody ever wants to do a tour of the places where I wrote about, People's Park is still there in Bloomington. So,
Nice.
yeah. But it is what it is. I love the history and the nerdity of all this. It's fun stuff. And when I do it to become a better writer, because I think Phil is one of the most important writers of the 20th century. I wouldn't have devoted this
Mm-hmm.
much time to him if I didn't think that. Um, he's not even necessarily my favorite size. I mean, in a lot of ways, I like John Brunner better, who is a contemporary of his from England. But uh, and I'm just as influenced by Brunner as I am PKD. But I think PKD speaks to very specific things, and PKD wrote a lot of crap, but when he was on, and things like
Mm-hmm.
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or Three Stigmata, Palmer Eldridge, or Galactic Pie Healer. I mean, some of these are Scanner Darkly. These are absolute 100% masterpieces, and worthy of study and research, and renewed interest. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If I want to find out more about your author journey, if I want to see the podcast, if I want to follow along with what you're publishing, where would be some places that I would do that?
Well, usually with each and every book that I release, I do an episode of my own podcast where I have somebody else interview me, and those are all up there and a part of it. Uh, but again, for me, the journey, author wise, is getting the books, and so
Hmm.
most of the books are available online, like Bookshop, BarnesandNobles.com. I prefer than Amazon, um, but you can get them all on Amazon. I think, um, well, and The Last Night to Kill Nazis is available nationally at Barnes and Nobles. So, um, that should be one of the first books in the horror section with my, having an A name. So that's there, and that's easy to find. The books are easy to find. The podcasts, here's the thing: you're not going to learn a lot about my writing from the podcast, because I'm always talking about other people. And that's fine. That's the Book of Sphere. But the Dickheads podcast is, sometimes you have to, like, on Apple Podcasts, you have to look for PKD heads, because
Hmm.
they thought we were a penis podcast or something, and it was hard to find us for a little bit. That being said, you can, also, probably one of the best places for dickheads, if you want to see us talking, is the YouTube page. So if you look up Dickheads podcast on YouTube, you'll find, all the episodes are up on YouTube as well. There's a few audio exclusive ones, but not very many. And then my personal podcast is called Postcards from a Dying World. And that one I can do whatever I want. I've interviewed astronomers, I've interviewed musicians, I've interviewed most of the episodes are book related. And I'm currently doing a mini series on the Science Fiction Hall of Fame short stories. And so if you get that book from 1973, the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, it has like all like voted upon in the early 70s of like the best stories of the golden age. And one by one, I'm going through the short stories with a guest panel. And those are really, I think, excellent episodes to listen to. And postcards is, it's a little bit, I do it a little bit more often than Dickheads, but it's also, and some things like I did a panel at a conference a couple weeks ago on Severance, and so the TV
Mm-hmm.
show Severance, and that's up there. And whatever the latest season of Star Trek, I have a crew of my biggest Star Trek nerds that come on and talk Star Trek with me, and I always do top reads of the year because I read over 100 books a year, so both modern and retro. So, and I do a lot of reviews and stuff. So that's all out there. And I try to see. Here's the thing, Jason, is that I try to add to the bookosphere, right? Like to talk about other people's
Mm-hmm.
books and hope it.
It
I
reciprocates, yes.
get some good karma back, and I don't, for whatever reason, I don't get a lot of reviews. And last night, To Kill Nazis sells a lot and has great word of mouth, but it has very little reviews. And I don't know why that is. Although the best review that book ever got was Paperback Warrior. They like completely got it in a way that most people didn't. And, like immediately knew that it was Alistair MacLean influenced, which is I guess a deep cut now because even though he was a best-selling author in the 60s and 70s, most people these days don't even know who he is, and
Mhm.
he was a huge influence on those books. So, the fact that Paperback Warrior got it was pretty exciting for me. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
those places. I'm really easy to follow on Blue Sky and on Facebook are probably the places I post the most. If you're on Facebook and you want to follow my work, send me a friend request. But most everything new or interesting that I put out, including all the book reviews, the columns for I write a column for Amazing Stories, um, like all that stuff I post on Blue Sky. So
Cool, cool. Yeah, well, definitely directing people your way for the Bookosphere Karma, by all means. And I appreciate the creating that you're doing, the research that you're doing, the fandom architecture. So glad to have you back here anytime, and I may jump onto one of your podcasts at some point as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, we're there every Tuesday. So and like I said, this Ken Liu one's a big one. I would definitely say it's a good week to start because and eventually they will get on our YouTube feed so you can watch them. It's just we're very slow about moving them to the feed. So, and it's best to be there live because if you jump in live, you can ask questions, you can be a part of the discussion, and it's a good prompt too because like let's say we're reading a particular short story that week, it's a really good way to join the community. And like in 2 weeks we're reading this story Beyond Lies the Wub, which was technically the first
Mhm.
PKD story that was out in the world, but it was not the first that he sold or the first that he wrote, but it's just the first one that got out there. And we're all reading it, so we're all talking about it. And there's just a lot of good community and things that go on there. And we do this every Tuesday, and we've all become pretty good friends. And got to started hanging out in the real world, like stalking Phil's houses all over the Bay Area. And we're going to be doing that next year in Orange County for all the places he lived in Orange County for PKD Fest. And I should say the call for papers is going out in December. So if people want to write a paper or present a paper at PKD Fest or be a part of panels or come to that, that's going to be August 20th through the 23rd in Fullerton, California, on the Fullerton campus where Phil spent a lot of time in the last couple of years of his life. And, you know, it's a really important place. His papers are there. And we're going to have a pop up museum where people can see the original manuscripts that are in the Fullerton archive, which, by the way, includes the original red penned, straight from the typewriter copy of Dune. Um, yeah, that you can see and kind of thumb through, and things like that are going to be there. So it's going to be really neat. It won't just be PKD, although PKD will be our main focus. But you know, and look, we're open to papers about Le Guin or like other, other writers that were Norman Spinrad or whoever was in his orbit. And we appreciate that. And you can always pitch whatever concept you want for doing talks for the weekend. And if we like it, we'll take it. But it should be a fun time coming up in Fullerton. So I hope to see folks that physically there. So
Yeah, yeah, very cool, very cool. Well, David, I won't keep you from the last six short stories you said, something like that, that you're
yeah, yeah.
writing
Well, hey,
about.
no, this is a nice it's nice for me because I'm always talking about Phil, so it's good to actually talk about my own writing a little bit.